She found it at the bottom of a box of old papers, a printed news article, a photograph, and 11 words in her mother's handwriting that changed everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her husband, and the woman who raised her. The headline read, "Marcus Webb sentenced to 3 years for aggravated assault and witness intimidation." The article was dated 18 years ago. The man in the photograph was her husband, and underneath it, in her mother's handwriting, the handwriting Grace had known since she first learned to read, 11 words. D. Confirmed. Marcus Webb. Do not tell Grace. She is happy. Her mother had known. Before the wedding, she had held her daughter's bouquet. She had cried at the altar. She had watched Grace say "I do" to a man whose real name she had never been told, and she had said nothing for 13 years. Most women would have screamed. Most women would have confronted both of them that same day. Grace Okafor folded the envelope, put it in her bag, and went back downstairs. She helped her mother for another 2 hours. She had tea. She kissed her goodbye at the door. Then she drove home to her husband and said nothing. Not yet. This story will teach you something it took Grace 13 years and 1 envelope to understand. The people who love you are not always the people who protect you. Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who decide, quietly, with the best of intentions, that your happiness is more important than your right to know the truth. And that decision, no matter how much love is behind it, is a theft. It is the theft of your choice. Some betrayals do not come from enemies. They come from the people sitting across from you on Sunday dinner, holding your hand, telling you everything is fine. If you have ever trusted someone completely and found out they were keeping something from you, this story is for you. If you have ever had to choose between the love you feel for someone and the anger of what they did, this story is for you. Now settle in, because what Grace does with that envelope and what she says to her mother when she finally speaks is one of the most powerful things you will hear in a long time. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell me, if you found that envelope, would you have walked back downstairs and had tea, or would you have confronted her that same day? I read every single comment, and I cannot wait to hear what you think. Let us get into it.
Grace Okafor had been an accountant for 18 years. She was the kind of accountant clients kept for decades, not because she was the cheapest or the most convenient, but because she was precise in the way that builds trust over time. She noticed things. She remembered things. She did not miss details. This was, she would later understand, the particular irony of her situation. She had spent 18 years catching other people's discrepancies. She had not caught her own. The house in Decatur was theirs, bought in year 3 of the marriage, a 4-bedroom with a garden that Daniel maintained on weekends with the quiet satisfaction of a man who liked to see things grow. Grace had painted the kitchen herself. The children's handprints were pressed into a square of concrete in the garden path. Maya at 3, Jordan at 1, their small palms preserved in gray. Daniel Okafor was an engineer for a civil infrastructure firm. He had been there for 11 years. He was methodical at work and present at home, the kind of father who attended every school play and remembered every teacher's name and showed up to the difficult conversations without being asked. He was not a dramatic man. He was steady. Grace had loved that about him from the beginning. They had met at a professional conference 14 years ago. He had been sitting next to her at a panel discussion and had leaned over during a particularly long presentation and said, "I think this speaker has confused thoroughness with insight." She had looked at him and known immediately that she liked him. From the outside, the Okafors were a solid family. 13 years, 2 children who were doing well, a house with handprints in the concrete, a marriage that looked, from every observable angle, like it had been built carefully and maintained honestly. From the inside, Grace had occasionally wondered, over the years, why Daniel never spoke about his childhood with any real detail. His parents had died before she met him, he said. He had no siblings. His past was a quiet country she had learned not to press him on, because pressing seemed to cause him pain, and she had loved him enough not to want to cause him pain. She had considered this thoughtfulness. She would later name it differently. Grace's mother, Patricia Mensah, had been a school administrator for 30 years before she retired. She was a precise woman, organized and direct, who had raised Grace after Grace's father died when Grace was 7. She had done it alone, and she had done it well, and Grace had grown up knowing that her mother was the most capable person in any room. They spoke twice a week. Patricia came for Sunday dinners when her health allowed. She knew Maya's favorite subjects and Jordan's preferred bedtime story, and the name of every teacher either child had ever had. She was the grandmother her grandchildren would measure all other relationships against. Grace had told her mother everything, her whole life. Not everything, she was a grown woman with a private marriage, but the shape of things, the important things. Patricia was the first person she had called when she found out she was pregnant with Maya. She was the person Grace had called from the hospital waiting room when Jordan broke his arm at 8 years old. She was the most trusted person in Grace's life. This was not an accident. It was built over 41 years of consistent, attentive, deliberate presence. Patricia had earned that trust with every difficult conversation she had not avoided, every inconvenient truth she had chosen to deliver rather than protect her daughter from. Or so Grace had believed. Daniel O'Coffer had not always been Daniel O'Coffer. His name, the one on his birth certificate, the one on the court documents that Grace would find in a public database at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night 14 years into their marriage, was Marcus Webb. At 23, Marcus Webb had been convicted of aggravated assault and witness intimidation following an altercation that had escalated in ways he had not intended and could not undo. He had served 3 years. He had come out at 26 with a clean record of behavior, a deep and permanent understanding of consequence, and a desire to become someone no one could connect to what he had done. In Georgia, a person can petition the court for a legal name change. It is public record. The conviction remains attached to both names in the criminal database. But in the ordinary course of a personal relationship, in the years before background checks were a casual habit, a man named Daniel O'Coffer with a clean record under that name was simply a man named Daniel O'Coffer with a clean record. He had moved to Atlanta. He had built a career. He had met Grace at a conference and known almost immediately that she was the person he wanted to build the rest of his life with. He had also known almost immediately that telling her the truth might cost him everything he was trying to build. So he had not told her. He had told himself he would someday, when the time was right, when the marriage was stable enough to hold the weight of it. But the right time never came, because every year of silence made the next year of silence easier to justify. And by the time he understood that the right time had been before the wedding, it was already 13 years too late. The name on his birth certificate was Marcus Webb. The name on his daughter's school records was Daniel O'Coffer. Both were true. Neither was the whole truth. And the woman sleeping in the next room had no idea that those two things were the same man.
The engagement party was held at a restaurant in Midtown Atlanta on a Saturday evening in September, 13 years ago. 60 people, fairy lights, the particular happiness of a room full of people who are glad for someone they love. Patricia had been glad. She had watched Grace that evening, luminous in a burgundy dress, laughing at something Daniel had said, her hand in his, and felt the particular satisfaction of a mother who has worried about her child for years and can finally stop worrying. Grace had been careful with her heart after her father died. She had not given it easily. And here was Daniel Okafor, steady, attentive, clearly devoted, and Grace was happy in a way Patricia had not seen before. She was at the bar collecting drinks when a woman she did not recognize approached her. The woman said, "Are you Grace's mother?" Patricia said yes. The woman said, "My name is Carol. I grew up in the same neighborhood as a man named Marcus Webb. The man your daughter is engaged to, I believe he is Marcus Webb. He was in trouble with the law some years back. I do not know everything that happened, but I thought you should know before the wedding." Carol left before Patricia could ask her anything more. Patricia stood at the bar with 2 glasses of champagne and looked across the room at her daughter and her daughter's fiancé and said nothing to anyone for the rest of the evening. She had made her decision before she set the glasses down. She called Daniel that night. He came to her house the following morning. She told him what Carol had said. She told him she needed him to tell her the truth. Daniel told her the truth. He told her about Marcus Webb, about the assault, a fight that had started over something he could no longer fully justify and had ended with a man in the hospital and Daniel in handcuffs, about the witness intimidation charge that had come from a panicked phone call he had made in the days after the arrest, about 3 years in prison, about the name change, the move to Atlanta, the decision to build a life that Marcus Webb could not have. He told her he loved Grace. He told her he was not the same man who had done those things. He told her the wedding was 6 weeks away, and Grace was the happiest he had ever seen her, and he was asking Patricia, begging her not to take that from them both. Patricia listened to all of it. Then she sat in her kitchen for a long time. She thought about Grace at 27, careful, composed, finally happy. She thought about what the truth would do to the wedding, to the relationship, to her daughter's carefully guarded heart. She thought about whether Daniel was telling the truth about having changed, and decided, looking at him across her kitchen table, watching him cry, that he was. She made a decision. "I will not tell her," Patricia said, "but you will live with this. And if it ever comes out, and it will come out, these things always do, you will not say that I helped you hide it. You will say I stayed silent. That is what I am doing. I am staying silent. Do you understand the difference?" Daniel said yes. He did not understand the difference. Neither, yet, did she. Patricia kept her word. She attended the wedding 6 weeks later. She held Grace's bouquet at the altar. She cried when they said their vows. She danced at the reception. She gave a speech about the kind of woman her daughter had become and the kind of man she believed Daniel to be. She meant every word of it. That was the thing she would struggle to explain later. She had not been performing. She had genuinely believed in the years that followed that she had made the right call. The marriage was good. Daniel was a good husband. The grandchildren arrived and were healthy and loved. Grace was happy in the sustained, ordinary way that is more valuable than the dramatic happiness of early romance. Every year that passed added weight to her certainty. 13 years of evidence that the man at the altar had been worth protecting. 13 years of Sunday dinners and family photographs, and Grace calling her twice a week with the unreserved openness of a daughter who trusts her mother completely. She had written the note the morning after the engagement party, before Daniel came over. She had needed to write it down, to confirm for herself what she had been told and what she intended to do. She had folded it inside the printout of the article she had found online that same night and put it in an envelope and filed it in the box of papers she kept in the spare bedroom. She had not thrown it away. She could not have said, if asked, exactly why. It was an ordinary Saturday in November. Grace had come over at 10 in the morning with coffee and the intention of spending 4 hours helping her mother sort through the spare bedroom, which had accumulated years of boxes that Patricia had been meaning to go through since she downsized. The work was the kind that requires no thought, a rhythm of open, sort, decide, stack, keep, shred, donate. Old tax returns, warranty cards for appliances that no longer existed, Christmas cards from people who had moved or died, her father's university transcripts, which Grace set aside in the keep pile without looking at them too closely. The envelope was at the bottom of the third box. It was not labeled, it was not hidden, it was simply there, under a layer of old utility bills, in the way that things are kept when they are not quite thrown away but cannot be displayed. Grace almost put it in the shred pile. She opened it instead. She read the article first, then she looked at the photograph for a long time. The photograph was taken outside a courthouse. The man in it was younger, 23 years old, in a gray suit that did not fit him well, his face carrying the particular expression of someone who has just been told what his next 3 years will look like. But the face was her husband's face, the jaw, the eyes, the way his left hand hung at his side. She looked at the date on the article, 18 years ago. She looked at her husband's face in the photograph. Then she looked at the note, 11 words in her mother's handwriting, the handwriting she had known since before she could write herself, the handwriting on her birthday cards every year, on the note tucked into her lunch the first day of secondary school, on the letter Patricia had sent her when Maya was born. D confirmed. Marcus Webb. Do not tell Grace. She is happy. She read them 4 times. Then she sat on the floor of her mother's spare bedroom and stayed there for a while. She was not crying. She was an accountant. She was finding the discrepancy and tracing it back to its source and understanding the full shape of the error before she decided what to do about it. The discrepancy was this: she had built 14 years of her life on a foundation she had never been shown, and the person who had known, the person she had trusted most, had decided that her happiness was more important than her right to choose. She put the envelope in her bag. She stood up. She straightened her clothing. She picked up the box she had been sorting and carried it to the landing to join the others. "I'm going to need another bin bag," she called downstairs. "Under the sink," her mother called back. Grace went to the kitchen. She found the bin bags under the sink. She filled the kettle and made 2 cups of tea without being asked. She brought them upstairs and set one beside her mother and went back to sorting. She helped for another 2 hours. She talked about Maya's school project. She talked about Jordan's football team. She asked about her mother's neighbor's health and listened to the answer. She laughed at something Patricia said about a television program. She was, by every visible measure, exactly who she had been when she arrived. At 1 o'clock, she said she should get back for the children. Patricia said, "Thank you for today. I don't know what I would do without you." Grace said, "That's what I'm here for." She kissed her mother on the cheek. She drove home. She needed 3 days before she was ready to move. The children went to bed at 9. Daniel watched television. Grace said she had work to catch up on and went to the study and closed the door. She searched Marcus Webb, Atlanta, Georgia, conviction. The court records were public. In Georgia, the criminal database is searchable. She found Marcus Webb, date of birth matching Daniel's exactly, convicted 18 years ago of aggravated assault and witness intimidation, sentenced to 3 years, released in good standing. She found the original news article, the same one from the envelope, but this time on her own screen, found by her own hands. She found the name change petition, filed 16 years ago. Marcus Webb legally petitioned to be known as Daniel Okafor. The petition was granted. Both names appear in the record. It was legal. Every part of it was legal. She sat with this for a long time. The name change was not fraud. Daniel Okafor was his legal name. He had not forged documents or stolen an identity. He had done something that the law permitted, and then he had used that legal permission to build a life in which the woman he married never had the information she needed to decide whether she wanted to marry him. That was the part that was not legal. It was not criminal, but it was the theft of something Grace did not yet have a word for. On Monday, she called a family law attorney. Her name was Sandra Cole. A colleague had used her during a difficult divorce 3 years ago and described her as someone who did not flinch. Grace told Sandra what she had found: the article, the note, the name change. She asked 2 questions. What were her legal rights, and was there anything else she needed to know before she confronted anyone? Sandra told her the name change was legal. The concealment was grounds for annulment in Georgia on the basis of fraud, specifically the fraudulent misrepresentation of identity material to the marriage contract. It would not be automatic, but it was arguable. She should not make any financial moves yet. She should document everything. On Tuesday, Grace hired a private investigator. She needed to know if there was anything else, any other chapter of Marcus Webb's history she had not found, any outstanding issues under either name, any reason beyond the marriage to be afraid of the man she had been sleeping beside for 13 years. The PI came back with a clean report on Wednesday morning. Daniel Okafor had not reoffended under either name. His record since release was spotless. His finances were clean. There was no other woman. There were no other secrets she had not already found. There was only the one, the original one, the one that had been enough. The children were in bed. Grace sat in the kitchen and waited for Daniel to finish washing the dishes. She had been watching him for 3 days. She had watched him make the children's lunches. She had watched him help Jordan with his reading homework with the patient repetition of a father who had done it 100 times. She had watched him bring her a cup of tea at 10 p.m. without being asked, the way he had done for 13 years. She had been looking for the man named Marcus Webb in the man named Daniel Okafor, and she had not found him. What she had found was the same man she had always known, doing the same things he had always done, living the same life he had built on a foundation she was now standing outside of. He set the last dish on the drying rack and turned around. "You've been quiet," he said. "I know," Grace said. "Sit down." He sat down. She put the envelope on the kitchen table between them.
Daniel looked at the envelope. He looked at Grace. He looked at the envelope again. "Where did you find it?" he said. "My mother's spare bedroom," Grace said, "in a box of papers. Last Saturday." A silence. "You've known since Saturday," Daniel said. "I needed 3 days," Grace said. "Tell me everything." He told her. He did not minimize. He did not reach for the version of the story that made him look better. He told her about the assault, a fight at a party at 23 that had started as an argument and ended with him hitting a man hard enough to cause serious injury. He told her about the intimidation charge, a phone call he had made to a witness in the days after the arrest, panicked and stupid, and the worst decision of a long list of bad decisions that year. He told her about the 3 years, about what prison had done to him and what he had decided it would mean, about the name change, legal, filed properly, granted by the court, about moving to Atlanta and building the career and becoming, with deliberate intention, a different man. "I was going to tell you," he said, "before the wedding. I had decided." "But you didn't," Grace said. "No." The silence after that single word was the longest silence of their marriage. "Why didn't you tell me," Grace said, "before the wedding, if you had decided?" Daniel looked at the table. "Your mother found out first," he said. Grace was very still. "Someone at the engagement party recognized me," Daniel said. "A woman named Carol. She told your mother.
Your mother came to me the next morning." "What did she say?" "She said she had heard. She wanted to know if it was true. I told her everything. I told her what I'd just told you." "And then?" "She told me she would stay silent. She said—" He stopped. "She said the wedding was in 6 weeks, and Grace was happy, and the past was the past. She said she was staying silent, that it was her choice, not mine." "But you let her," Grace said. "You let my mother make that decision for you." "I was afraid of losing you." Grace looked at her husband for a long time. "You should have been afraid of this moment," she said. They talked for 2 more hours. Grace asked every question she needed to ask. Daniel answered every one. There was no version of the conversation that made what he had done right, but there was a version of it, the full version, with nothing withheld, that Grace could at least see completely. And seeing things completely was what she needed before she could decide anything. At midnight, she said, "I need you to sleep in the spare room tonight." Daniel said, "Yes." "I need time to think about what I want to do, about us, about the children. I am not going to make a decision tonight." "I understand." "I have one more thing to do before I can think about any of it." "Your mother," Daniel said. "Yes," Grace said. She stood up. She picked up the envelope. She left the kitchen. She did not cry until she was in the bathroom with the door locked. Then she let herself cry for 10 minutes, not for the marriage, not yet, but for the version of her life she had believed she was living, for the foundation she had thought was solid, for 14 years of Saturday dinners with her mother and twice-weekly phone calls, and the absolute certainty that Patricia Mensah was the one person in her life who would always tell her the truth. She washed her face. She went to bed. She had one more conversation to have.
Grace came on a Friday afternoon. She had not called ahead. She knew that if she called ahead, she would give her mother time to prepare, and Patricia was a woman who prepared well. Grace needed to see her mother's first response, not a rehearsed one. Patricia opened the door, and her face did what faces do when they register something is wrong, before the mind has processed what it is. She said, "Grace, come in." Grace came in. She sat down. She placed the envelope on the coffee table between them. Patricia looked at the envelope. Then she looked at Grace. Then she sat down in the armchair across from her daughter and folded her hands in her lap. "Where did you find it?" Patricia said. "In the spare bedroom," Grace said, "when I was helping you sort." Patricia nodded slowly. "I should have destroyed it years ago," she said. "But you didn't," Grace said. "No," Patricia said, "I didn't." She did not say, "I don't know why I kept it." She did not say, "I was going to tell you." She did not reach for the version of events that made her look like a woman who had been struggling with a difficult choice. She simply sat across from her daughter and acknowledged what was on the table. Grace had not expected that. She had expected denial or deflection, or the particular rhetorical skill of a woman who had managed difficult conversations for 30 years as a school administrator. What she had not expected was this, a woman who had been waiting for 13 years to be caught. "Tell me why," Grace said. Patricia told her. She said, "I met with Daniel the morning after the engagement party. He told me everything. He told me about the assault and the prison and the name change. He told me he was a changed man, and I believed him," Patricia said. "I had looked at him that evening at the party, and I had seen the way he looked at you, and I made a decision. I decided that the man who looked at you that way was not the same man who had committed those crimes, and I decided that destroying your happiness 6 weeks before your wedding over something that was over and done with was not something I was willing to do." "You made that decision for me," Grace said. "I was protecting you." "You were protecting your idea of what was best for me," Grace said. "That is different." Patricia said, "Grace, look at the life you have built. Look at your children, your home, your marriage.
Daniel has been a good husband. He has been a good father. Was I wrong about him? Was the decision wrong?" Grace looked at her mother for a long moment. "That's what you're doing right now," Grace said. "You're defending it." "I'm explaining it." "No," Grace said, "you're defending it. You're asking me to evaluate your decision based on how it turned out. You're saying, look, it worked, so I was right. And that is the thing I cannot forgive." Patricia said, "What are you saying, Grace?" Grace stood up. She picked up the envelope. "I am not angry at you for making a mistake," Grace said. "People make mistakes. People stay silent when they should speak, and I understand why. I understand the calculation you made. I even understand that you made it out of love." She put her coat on. "What I cannot accept," Grace said, "is that you just sat across from me and defended it. You asked me to judge your decision by its outcome. You asked me to be grateful, and that means you still do not understand what you took from me. You took my right to decide, and you do not think that was wrong, and I cannot be in a relationship with someone who does not think that was wrong." Patricia said, "Grace." "I love you," Grace said. "I will always love you, but I need you to understand that I am not ending this because you made a mistake 13 years ago. I am ending this because of what you said in the last 10 minutes." She walked to the door. She did not slam it. She closed it behind her with the same quiet precision she brought to everything. And that precision, that composure, that deliberate absence of drama was the most devastating thing she could have done. Patricia sat in her living room for a long time after the sound of Grace's car disappeared.
Grace and Daniel separated at the end of November. It was not a dramatic separation. There was no shouting, no broken objects, no scene that the children would carry with them. Daniel moved to a flat in Midtown. The children stayed with Grace. Daniel came for them on alternate weekends and every Wednesday evening and showed up to every school event and maintained the rhythm of fatherhood with the same steady reliability he had brought to everything for 13 years. Grace did not rush toward divorce. She had a family law attorney. She had documentation. She had options. But she was an accountant, and she understood that the most important financial and legal decisions should not be made in the first month of emotional upheaval. She gave herself time. She told Maya and Jordan that their father was not living at home anymore. She told them it was not their fault, and she meant it completely. And she told them in the way that left room for questions without requiring answers immediately. Maya cried. Jordan asked if Daniel was still coming to his football match on Saturday. Grace said yes. Daniel came. The children would be fine. She knew this with the certainty of a woman who had decided to make it true. Patricia called twice in the first 2 weeks. Grace did not answer. She did not block the number. She was not certain she would never answer. She simply was not ready. And she had learned, at 41 in the hardest school, that not being ready was a complete sentence. In the 3rd week, a letter arrived, 3 pages in her mother's handwriting. Grace read all of it. Patricia did not defend the decision again. Grace had to give her that. The letter was an apology, a real one, the kind that does not contain the word "but." Patricia wrote about the engagement party and what she had been thinking, and how she had been thinking it for 13 years, and she was sorry. She wrote about how much she loved Grace and how much she loved the grandchildren, and she was not asking for anything except for Grace to know that she understood, that she had finally understood, in the silence of her living room after the door closed, what she had taken. Grace read the letter twice. She put it in a drawer. She did not reply. Some silences are not absence. Some silences are the only answer left. In month 3, Grace's Aunt Cynthia called, Patricia's sister, a woman Grace had always liked, practical, plain-spoken, without Patricia's administrative authority. "I am not calling to convince you of anything," Cynthia said,
which Grace appreciated. "I just want to know you're okay." "I'm okay," Grace said. "Your mother is not okay," Cynthia said. "I know," Grace said. A pause. "Is there anything that would—" Cynthia started. "Aunt Cynthia," Grace said, "I love my mother. That has not changed, but I cannot be in a relationship with someone I do not trust. I spent 13 years trusting a man who was not who he said he was. I am not going to spend the next 13 years pretending to trust a woman who I know will decide for me when she thinks she knows better. I love her, but I know her now, and what I know is too much." Cynthia was quiet for a moment. "I'll tell her you're okay," she said. "Thank you," Grace said. "Please tell her the grandchildren are well."
6 months after the spare bedroom, Grace Okafor was at her desk by 8. She had always been early to the office. It was a habit from her first job, maintained through promotions and marriage and 2 children and everything else. The morning before the building filled up was her most productive time. She thought clearly in silence. The office looked the way it had always looked, her certificates on the wall, her filing system color-coded, which her colleagues found excessive and which she considered the minimum standard for a functional workspace. Her coffee mug, the one Maya had painted at a pottery class 3 years ago, slightly lopsided, entirely irreplaceable. Maya's school photo was on the desk. Jordan's drawing, a house with a sun above it and 4 stick figures that had, 6 months ago, included one that was taller than the others, was pinned to the corkboard. The drawing had 4 figures. It still had 4. Grace had not asked Jordan to change it, and Jordan had not offered to. Her name was on the door, Grace Okafor. She had considered changing it. She had sat with a form for 2 weeks. Then she had put it in the filing cabinet under N for not yet and gone back to work. Okafor was her children's name. She had used it professionally for 13 years. It was on her certificates, her client accounts, her reputation. It was not Daniel's name anymore. It was hers. Whatever it had been built on, she had built something on top of it that belonged entirely to her. She was not going to give that up because someone else had made a decision she had not been consulted on. She had learned things in the last 6 months that she had not expected to learn. She had learned that she was better at being alone than she had thought. She had spent 14 years in a marriage that was, in many real ways, a good marriage, and she had assumed that her capacity for contentment lived inside it. She had discovered that it did not. It lived in her. It had always lived in her. She had learned that the children were more resilient than her fear had allowed her to imagine. Maya had cried for 3 days, and then, with the unsentimental practicality of a 12-year-old who had inherited her mother's accounting instincts, had reorganized her understanding of the situation and gotten on with things. Jordan had not fully understood, and Grace was not certain he needed to yet. He knew his father loved him. He knew his mother was okay. For 9 years old, that was enough. She had learned something about trust that she could not have articulated before November. She had thought that trust was built through loyalty, through showing up, through consistency, through never leaving. What she understood now was that trust was built through honesty, and that you could show up every day for 41 years and still be a stranger if you had decided, once, that your judgment was more important than another person's right to know. She did not know, yet, what she would do about Daniel. She was not in a hurry to decide. She knew what she would not do about her mother. That decision had been made in the living room on a Friday afternoon, and she had not revisited it. At 8:45, her first client arrived. He was a small business owner, 3rd year of trading, the particular anxious energy of a man who has built something with his own hands and is terrified it might not hold. Grace had seen it many times. She was good with it. She showed him into her office. She closed the door. She sat across from him and opened his file and looked at the numbers and said, "Tell me where you think the problem is." He told her. She listened. She looked at the accounts with the attention she brought to everything, thorough, precise, nothing overlooked. She found the discrepancy inside 20 minutes. She always did. That was the thing about Grace Okafor. She noticed things. She remembered things. She did not miss details. She had, once, missed the most important detail of her own life. She had trusted someone with her blind spot, and that person had stood in it. She was not going to have a blind spot anymore. She looked at her client across the desk and said, "Here is where the problem is. Here is how we fix it. Here is what we do first." She had a full day. She was ready for it. Grace Okafor found the truth at the bottom of a box of papers on an ordinary Saturday morning. She helped her mother for 2 more hours. She drove home. She waited 3 days. She asked every question. She heard every answer. And then she walked out of her mother's living room and closed the door quietly, because precision was the only thing she had left, and she was not going to waste it on a door. She kept the name. She kept the children. She kept herself.